and almost like, we don't want to wake up, we want to stay asleep, and that's normal. But then you wake up and you've got this terrible, terrible world out here, and you're like, oh, do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Like I say, like I said in the previous, all the volume of egotism, hatred, violence, it's all been pushed up to, 10 out of 10. Everything's maximum evil, maximum like evils, maximum egotisms, maximum greed. Like, God gave us this earth and for free, and there's not a single place where anyone can go just to lay down their heads. I used to think about it on the couple of times where I didn't have anywhere to go. Why can't they just put like beach huts or garden sheds, and a security guard? That's all it would take, so that people can get out the elements and feel safe. A little bit like a prison. I mean, they spend fortunes on people in prison. Why can't they spend on people that don't commit crimes, even to the point of being homeless? Because I know there's a lot of people that would commit crimes just to stop themselves being homeless. So they're quite gallant in some ways. Some of the homeless, the homeless that are just there for the drugs and to sell drugs. I'm not talking about those. They're the worst of mankind, really. They've completely given up into the evil side, and they even go about beating up people that do good for the sake of killing people that do good. So no, I'm not talking about them. Like they do regular crack cocaine, and there's others too, don't they? I'm talking about this madness. How can they not? Why can they not accept now that it's a completely failed society? And what is this extra drive? Is this extra drive right at the end, which is obviously we're coming to the end of this civilization, because it just can't go on. I mean, if you look at, I would say the real problem, I went to India recently, that's the real problem, because whether it was always capitalist, but the British and I'd say probably in American propaganda, the British have really set off an explosion of capitalism in that country, and it's rife, and there's no socialism. Like the Europeans and British and American, the Europeans and Americans have set up welfare states and said, we're making all this money, the politicians got together, and said, look, I know none of you greedy colleagues want to help the people on the street, and you want to see people get free food and a free house. However, look at our country. If we don't do this, if we don't make sure everyone has a house and everyone has just a little bit of money for food, it's going to look appalling. And so, they set up welfare states. They haven't done that in India. And India also has a secondary problem, which is like, no population control. I don't know whether it's sexual desire. I wouldn't say that it is. Is it consequence of sexual desire? Or is it just more affinity? Is it more affinity with family and being like family? Who knows? I haven't been there long enough to study it, but what I saw, in the space of China has stopped it, right? They've kept their population at a billion, just a little bit more than a billion, and they kept it down because they put law and said, look, you can't have two children, you have one, which is fair enough. Want to be a parent, you can be a parent with one child, right? And we don't have the resources and space in our country to take care of it, so you can leave if you want. Otherwise, I think that's fair enough. But not India. If you do the math, what Indians will populate the world within 50 years, and it will be unlivable, right? And that's without all the other, problems that are going on. behind it. They're a nuclear country, so I would say that if you're looking at an inevitable nuclear war, that's where it's going to be. And there's already something going on there with China right now, isn't it? China's decided to take the water. They seem to think as long as they get resources, China, isn't it? They really don't seem to be a good world power, China. They don't seem to act in the interests of people. They seem to act in the interests of their gains. So it's coming to the end, and there's this extra push. And let me talk about the science again. The science is not science at all. The first science we learned as seekers of truth is that there are three energies that we all use right now. Okay, like say this is a pretty good example. Now, this does not exist on its own, just like all the things in nature do not exist on the end. What a man did was, in his mind, he visualized this. And therefore, it exists in that heavenly realm. And then it came into being in this realm. He visualized it. See, visualization is a very important thing for us to understand as human beings, that everything comes from visualization. And therefore, to understand that, well, Christ said that there are 5 keys. One of them, concentration, observation, introspection, meditation, and visualization. So when you visualize these sexual desire with that one, like these guys walking down the street, and these women, the women don't do it, don't they? They lure, but they're like octopuses, spiritually. Like they have sexual tentacles going out everywhere, scooping people up. And men, like they create one with this one, and then that one, and that one, and that one. Like I say, the insipid womb, the diseased womb. I was born in this womb. I was born through this womb. I was born diseased and insipid, and into a culture of diseased and insipidness. The Son of Man. That's what Jesus called them, the Son of Man. The people that are corrupted through man, but they have God inside them, propelling them forwards to try and pull themselves out of the darkness and the ignorance. No, this is what I do. This is why I preach. I don't preach with any intention, because you can't preach with intention. If you preach with intention, you're preaching what you think. You can't communicate with God by thinking. You communicate by God by forcing your mind to empty. Like I said, talking about the Borderlands, I just want to go and play Borderlands, the game. That's what I want to do, but there's something else trying to come out through me and say, hey, how about this? And I didn't believe it. You see, this is the way I've always talked. This is the way I've always confirmed my God. Because like all the other false prophets and false teachers out there, they don't do this. They don't force it down so that it comes up naturally. They force it to come out, but then it comes out through their egotisms. It comes out through their vanity. It comes out through the wrong way, right? And then it ends up tricking them in the end. Like you see these cult leaders again. But it's the same in the world. So I just wait. And the thing that wants to come out and be spoken, it's like the Lao Tzu. I always like that Lao Tzu. It's just so simple. You basically, you find a center point. This is what I do anyway. I find the center point of my skull. So, it's really easy to feel the skull up. And so I find the center point in my skull. And, it's like that. It comes out like this. And I have a halo. an envelope, a sphere envelope in my head, and there's nothing bothering my head because I am in fact in control of the energy. Right, so this is the one I'm talking about at the moment, the five keys. I'm going to talk about three. I'm going to talk about the visualization and, well, I'm talking about the science, the kinetic energy, the visualization, and the ether, the sensate, sensitive, the emotional energy. We have three types at the moment. We can put feelings and imprints, and we can move. And everything we do is through imprinting. So when we're little and we're babies and we're crawling on the floor and the angel come along, and it's the same with the animals. This is how God talks to the animals. The archangels, because there are many archangels over every soul, and that's what it takes. It takes many archangels over every living thing in order to maintain the material body. And so the archangel comes along and we're crawling on the floor, and with the help with parents as probably, and says, why don't you try and stand up? How does it say it? It says it through visualization and feeling. The two two to come the third, you see? The visualization, feeling, to come the kinetic, the action, right? So, the baby's starting to feel, what's that? What's that? Oh, like this. Puts his feet down. Oh, tries to stand up. Oh, yeah. You see? This is how God is training us. We don't even look at that. And we don't even look at the animals doing that. They look at this wonder when they see the birds, like, all in one perfect swoop. How do they do that? All without hitting each other. Like perfectly programmed drone robots or something. Well, they're following, that's all they know, the animals, is to follow that spirit all the time. Like Joshua Emmanuel Christ, who said, not a sparrow falls to the ground without Father's will. Everyone that's going to die, including us, will die at the time that God says. That, when it's their time to go. My biggest angst, and I'm going to keep coming back to it, so, this is the basic science. The basic science is that, for God's sake, people, when are you going, there is never ever going to be any answers with desires. Like the Lao Tzu said, you have to empty. The Buddha said the same thing too. You must conquer desire. You must conquer thoughts. Have no thoughts. Let no thoughts. These are obviously the first things that we should learn. It's like playing a game of football. How does it start? He knows the pitch. By shutting his eyes, he knows where the goals are. He knows where the lines are. Right? And even in the middle of a game, the footballer, he knows pretty roughly where people are. He knows where the ball is. He knows where likely the ball will go in his mind. Right? But it starts with empty, and then what? A visualization is placed inside it by yourself. You see? I live in this world which is very, very futuristic. All these things are very, very futuristic coming in the future, though. Are they futuristic? When, Jesus Christ was teaching these things 2,000 years ago to his disciples. Like you can read many, many stories about the resurrections. You know, the disciples, they did many, many resurrections because they knew how to connect with the power. And it's very easy, as I say, just like the birds that swing up, you know, you connect with this power of the Holy Spirit. It's not. Is it given by asking? It's not given by asking. It's given by dedication. Like someone once said to me, "Oh, you're the chosen one." It doesn't work like that. I chose it first. Well, so I think. But if you look at it in human terms, it is through discipline and dedication and offering your life. When you offer up your life, when you don't want to make the progresses in the world, when you don't, when you're not interested in the egotistical practices of the world, and you know you give up your egoism, you give up your egoism to find the true ego, to find the ego soul, that then the power starts to come through you. It, I just keep thinking the same thing. You know, it's such a terrible, terrible. You know, this wound, this insipid wound, and you know what really is there when you start to think about it? But absolute destruction. No, there is really nothing for the future of humankind but absolute destruction, because you know they try and, well, you can make all sorts of metaphors. You know, it's a bunch of people getting drunk, and you know they're trying to like make a political system, like instead of just stop getting drunk. You know, this is what they say. What they don't do, they don't look at who they are, what they are, and how they work, and it's madness. They look at the effects, but not the causes. They constantly do that. Like that's one of the things that I know a lot of people talk about. You know, the effects of say the criminals. You know, like they constantly punish these effects because it works for society, but they never ever consider the causes. And in fact, if you really look at it, the causes of people that go to prison are definitely completely about school, because they they block people into like, okay, you're the clever people, you know, you're going to go off and make money. You're the middle people, you know, well, some of you will make some money, you know, and you're the people at the bottom, you know, you ain't going to make nothing. It's like you'll be lucky if you've got even a job. You know, that's what they do at school. And, you know, well, what is this thing then? Okay, so what is this thing in human beings that decides, okay, this is the way the government's doing it. This is the way that everyone's doing it. That must be the right way to do it. And, you know, they just stop reasoning. Mm? And you know, they go on about Hitler. What's any different? Or they go on about Stalin. You know, what's any different than what they're doing? There's no difference. The whole thing is designed, it obviously is designed at this particular point in time, that human beings are manipulated with this science, which is, like I say, it's like a cult. It's like, this is science. You must do as you must do as science says, because you know that man in the white coat and that man with his books, and you know, all these men that are experts, they know better than you. You've got to do as they say. Right? You know, it doesn't matter if you've got reason. Mm? Doesn't matter if you've got good arguments. Mm? Like it shows you in the British court system or in the Western court system. No, they say, well, it doesn't matter if you've got an argument. That was the last time I was in court. The judge, he stood up and walked out, and he said, talk to the lawyer, is what he said. Because, you know, that's exactly how it works. It's like, well, if you got the money to argue your case, well, listen, right? Because the whole thing is a money thing. You know, you're not going to get any time in court, and you know they're going to do with you exactly as they want. I almost feel like language doesn't work with saying really how bad it is. Obviously, you know, it's an absolute contrast. It's a mix of fire and ice, because you know the air is so nice. Everything that God put there, the trees, the squirrels, the birds, the pigeons, little foxes. They've got rid of all the rabbits and just about everything else, but we've still got foxes and squirrels and pigeons. It's a shame about all the others, though. I mean, I still cry a little bit when I see the dogs, because if you really look, God gave us an Eden, and it had hundreds of these little dog clans over here and over here and over here and over here, and you can see, the way that he did the dog clans was the way that he did the humans. It wasn't one Adam. That was a mistranslation. Whoever translated the books of Moses, mistranslated that. He didn't say Adam, he said Adams. There were many Adams and Eves, all in all directions. Now that makes a lot of sense. And this is the kind of thing that they could confirm, because they've done the DNA map of the whole thing now. They've got everyone's DNA, not on the normal level, but on their level. They've got everyone's DNA on their level, because the super science again. And just like the police don't have cameras hardly anywhere, but super surveillance, they watch everyone. Again, they're not investing in people. It's not about people, and people keep working and working and working towards it, but they're working for destruction. I mean, Christ said it well. He said there's two roads, right? He said, like, take the narrow road that leads to life. And it's hard at times, but it's hard, that road, but it will lead to life. And few they are that go that way. And how wide it is, the road to destruction. And many they are going that way. And it's an easy road to go down. And I go over and over and over in my mind, why, Lord, why, Lord, why, Lord, why? Constantly, like David used to say, I just meditate on God's laws all the time. I'm in a constant conversation, because I raised my consciousness and I eradicated my evil desires that were in the way. And so I don't have desires. My desires are for a beautiful earth where every man has got his own space, and every man has got a right to earth. And for God's sake, no man is bound by these. Well, even if there was evil pockets or whatever, we could take care of it. But these multi-oligarch autocracies, these autocracies that completely demand. I mean, the old prophets were right, weren't they, when they said about the kings? When you have a king, if you ask for a king, he's going to take your land. He's going to take your money. He's going to take your princes. He's going to take your children to his army. Well, they don't, do they? They don't just take that. They take the whole thing. These people that rule, they take everything. There's nothing and nowhere to go anymore. There's nothing free. And essentially, this is the argument that makes life unlivable. Life is not livable. It's not free. The animals are free. Like I say, you try and take a wild animal, it will die rather than be captured, because that is its most precious thing, that it can run on the beautiful earth, what with rivers and stones and smells and dawns and winters and all those wonderful things, and it can just follow God's love wherever it goes. It can follow its heavenly Father's will wherever it goes. And what of man and human beings? He's completely and utterly given it up, and he's trying to live in a way that is not life, and he's trying to live in a way that's not human, and he's trying to manifest demonic. What is demonic? It starts off on the lower levels. What? Jealousy, stealing, hatred. In the middle, what? Cruelty, anger, and then up to the higher levels. He tries to make, like he has done with lust. Lust is at the top, the highest demon, and it can do absolutely what it wants. how have they managed to do this to people? I said I don't find, I, I, I'm immune to depression now. 50 years old. I've had enough of it, and I just don't have anything to do with that. It's like someone putting a bad smell at me. I'm just like, I just completely reject it. I can't receive depression. But there's just no reason to live in this world whatsoever, apart from the plan of God. But the plan of God is just this hope deep down inside that we just keep pushing forward and we get there in the end. But there's no joy. Everything is just fake. These marriages are not going to work. Your children, well, like I said to people that tell me about your children, when I had children, if I'd have gone to school and said, look, I don't like this, what you're teaching them, why are you teaching them that? Why are you teaching them that? Well, by the time they'd been at the school, you know, and I got round to doing it, like the children would have fought me anyway, because that's the first thing they do is that they put into the mind of the children to fight their parents. Like it was like Orwell said, the little children will rise up and grass on their parents. Oh, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do this. Though, if I had tried in any way to say, well, I don't like this or I don't like that at a school, instead of the school turning around and saying, okay, okay, sir, we understand, like, this is what we can, no respect whatsoever. It would be almost like they call the police. No, that's my argument to say, well, they're not my children. And you can't raise your own children in this country. You just can't do it. And you try and raise your children. I think there's a few movements in places. Maybe you can just about get away with it, but they give you so much harassment. They give you so much harassment with social securities and checks and tests. They come and test your children to make sure, because every child has to learn all that rubbish. Your geography and your biology, and let's say all this fake science. And the true science, like if you go through the Bible, there's just so much true science in there. Like if you ask, you shall receive. If you seek, you shall find. Take the narrow road. The salt of the earth. The good people. You're the salt of the earth. It's just filled. Not the Old Testament. Don't bother with the Old Testament. It's a different God. The God that came from the New Testament and the words of Christ, that every single word of it is just chock-a-block with the life advice of how to make yourself into a sensible, successful, and happy human being. And you wake up to be wise. So, well, I just keep coming back to you. I don't see like any reason to do. But I say that Borderlands, it's about the only thing that I can conjure up, because I can't go out there. I mean, I did have a little bit of a, this is a good example of London, right? People think like this is one of the standards of living of the world. I had, all right, sometimes I did feed them, and there was about 30 pigeons all coming and sitting up on the wall. But so what? I mean, they were here first, weren't they? And what? I mean, there's only like 3 trees out there. I don't think the trees are big enough for like all the different pigeons. Maybe they don't really like. I think maybe they'd naturally, yeah. If there was a whole forest, they'd naturally find like a tree each, wouldn't they? Kind of thing. If they get a big tree, with a hole, or they go onto cliffs, or maybe bushes. But there's nowhere left for them to go. But I had a little relationship with the pigeons for a while, feeding them. But I got told off, and then someone tried to come and film me, and I was obviously going to get, I was probably going to get an eviction notice or something. And so, I thought, well, I can't even do that anymore. I just kind of lock myself away and get into this VR and games, because that's all there is. You know, they built this world on like thrills, what orgasm. They don't build the world on, or are you going to have a good marriage, or they don't build the world around, you know, they don't build their lives around a good thing or an innocent thing. It's like that David Rockefeller trailer, like the scenic one, the first one, was it one that developed all the oil? And he said, like, there's only one sin, is that you compete. And, you know, there'd be an alternative, no, an alternative. That's what you're dealing with. You know, these teachings, the teachings of Christ, have absolutely no bearing in the world whatsoever. And you know, all these churches and schools and everything have got nothing to do. You know, they're nothing to do with what God is teaching at all. The only way that God is getting anything through to people whatsoever is in their hearts, directly, the direct relationship, which is the prophecy. It's been prophesied that in the end, God would talk to people directly, and that there would be no intercessor. And of course, you know, this is people's big mistake. So I always feel the same. I always feel like I wanted to say something, but I just couldn't find out what it was I wanted to say. So I'm going to leave it at that for now and see if that works. And eventually, you know, maybe I'll find the thing that I want to say and I want to try and get out.